The knife was already in his hand when the water hit his chest. It was just after 11 at night, 1,000 miles from land, and the boat Stephen Callahan built himself was going down under his feet. He had seconds. Not to think. To cut. Something had struck the hull in the dark. He never saw what. A whale, maybe. He only heard the crack, and then the sea coming in faster than a man can think. He grabbed a knife, a sleeping bag, a cushion, and cut loose the small inflatable raft lashed to the deck. Then the boat pulled itself down into the black, and took almost everything he owned with it. What was left was a rubber circle 6 feet wide. And you? Because this is where your brain does something you would not expect. You imagine that in a moment like this a person panics, screams, gives up. Some do. But most people, dropped into a disaster this total, go strangely quiet. The hands keep working while the mind goes flat and cold. Callahan later described it almost like watching himself from the outside. That flatness is not weakness. It is one of the oldest tools your body owns, and by the end of this you are going to understand exactly why it switches on. Stephen Callahan was 30 years old. He had built the boat himself, a small sloop called the Napoleon Solo, and he had sailed it alone across the Atlantic once already. This was the return leg, a solo crossing from the Canary Islands back toward the Caribbean. He knew the sea. He respected it. None of that mattered on the night it opened underneath him. The raft he escaped into was designed to keep a person alive for a day or two while rescue arrived. It was never meant to be a home. It had a canopy, an inflatable floor, and almost nothing else. Callahan managed to dive back to the sinking boat several times in the dark, filling a bag with whatever his fingers found. A bit of food, some flares, charts, a spear gun, 2 solar stills for making fresh water, a short spear, pieces of a life, grabbed at random in the seconds before the deck went under for good. Then he was alone on the open Atlantic, more than 1,000 miles from land in any direction. Here is the first thing the ocean teaches you. The problem is not the water. The problem is that you are surrounded by water you cannot drink. Seawater is so salty that drinking it pulls fluid out of your body faster than it puts any in. Your kidneys cannot keep up. Drink enough of it, and you die faster than if you had drunk nothing at all. So Callahan was floating on the largest supply of undrinkable water on Earth, and his life now depended on 2 flimsy plastic devices called solar stills, which slowly evaporated seawater and dripped out a trickle of fresh. A trickle. On a good day, a pint. Sometimes less. Sometimes when the stills clogged or the sea threw them around, nothing at all. You have gone maybe 4 hours without water and felt the headache start. Now hold that feeling and stretch it across weeks. The food ran out early. What kept him alive was the spear gun and the strange gift the ocean gives to anything that floats for long enough. Small fish began to gather under the raft, drawn to the shade and the strange new object in an empty sea. Triggerfish. Then the Dorados came, the big fast fish sailors call dolphinfish, and they followed the raft like an escort. Callahan learned to spear them through the floor of the raft, in the narrow water beneath him, striking down through the thin fabric that was the only thing between him and the deep. Think about what that means. To eat, he had to drive a spear through the bottom of the very thing keeping him alive. And this is the turn that nearly ended him. One night he speared a Dorado, and the fish, thrashing, drove the point of his own spear straight through the wall of the raft. The floor tore. Air hissed out into the dark. The raft began to fold in on itself, and Stephen Callahan was suddenly sinking into the middle of the Atlantic at night with sharks already circling, drawn by the blood and the struggle. Why do you feel your chest tighten reading that? You are safe. You are not there. But your body reacts anyway, because somewhere far back in your ancestry, the difference between imagining a threat clearly and surviving one was very small. The brain that flinches at a story is the same brain that kept your ancestors alive long enough to have you. Callahan did not drown that night. He fought the raft, jammed his body against the tier, and spent hours, then days, trying to repair a hole in an inflatable boat while floating on top of the ocean it was letting in. He rigged patches, He built a device to pump the air back in. He bailed. He failed, and patched, and bailed again. The repair was never finished. For the rest of the voyage he had to re-inflate the collapsing raft over and over, sometimes hundreds of times a day, a body pump against the whole weight of the sea. Let that be the image you hold. Not a man giving up, a man doing the same small desperate task 10,000 times because stopping meant dying. Now pull back, because here is what the ocean was really testing. It was not testing his strength. It was testing something older. There is a state psychologists have studied in survivors of disasters, soldiers, people trapped in collapsed buildings. In the first moments of catastrophe, a large fraction of people do not scream and do not run. They go still, calm, almost dreamlike. Researchers call it the incident response, and for a long time it was misread as shock or stupidity. It is neither. That flat calm is your nervous system stripping away everything that does not help you survive the next 60 seconds. Fear floods the body with energy but also with noise. The freeze cuts the noise. For the person who has a task in front of them, that cold clarity is the difference between fumbling and acting. Callahan lived inside that clarity for weeks. He kept a log. He rationed water by the sip. He gave himself jobs, tiny ones, to fill the endless hours, because he understood something that the ocean was trying to teach him. A mind with nothing to do turns on itself. So, he navigated. He tracked his position with a makeshift setup, watching the sun and the stars, and he calculated, slowly, that the currents were carrying him west toward the Caribbean at the pace of a slow walk. He was crossing an ocean at the speed of a man strolling through a park. It would take him, he estimated, somewhere between a month and 2 months. If the raft held. If the stills held. If the fish kept coming. The stills did not hold. They fouled and failed, and he rebuilt them from parts. And there were stretches where he had no fresh water at all, and drank the little he had collected drop by ration drop, his body shrinking, salt sores opening across his skin from the constant wet. 60 days in, his skin hung off him. He had lost a third of his body weight. He was covered in sores. His raft was a patched, half-collapsed ruin he re-inflated by hand around the clock, and still, every day he did the jobs, speared the fish, ran the stills, marked the log, watched the horizon. Remember the flat, cold calm from the first night, the strange quiet that came over him as the boat went down. It never fully left. It was not a moment. It was the thing carrying him across the sea. The same nervous system trick that keeps a person from screaming in the first 3 seconds of a disaster had, in him, stretched to fill 76 days. On day 75, he saw birds. Then the color of the water changed, that shift from the deep blue, black of open ocean to something lighter, and he knew land was near. On day 76, fishermen off the island of Galante, near Guadeloupe, saw birds diving on the fish that had gathered under a strange battered object drifting toward their coast. They went to look. They found a man. Stephen Callahan had drifted more than 1,800 nautical miles across the Atlantic Ocean, alone, in a 6-foot rubber raft, for 76 days. It remains one of the longest solo survivals adrift ever recorded. He walked barely off that island. He wrote it all down in a book called Adrift. He lived. So here is the part that belongs to you. You will almost certainly never lose a boat in the mid-Atlantic. But you carry the same machinery he did. The flat calm that dropped over him as the water rose is sitting in your nervous system right now, waiting. You have felt a small version of it. The strange quiet in the middle of a car accident, the way your hands kept moving during an emergency while your mind went silent and clear. That is not you failing to feel. That is the oldest part of you deciding, faster than thought, that this is a moment for doing, and not for panicking. The knife was already in his hand when the water hit his chest. He did not decide to grab it. Something older than his fear decided for him. And the reason you flinched at that image, the reason a story about a man in a rubber raft made your own chest go tight, is that you are running the exact same code. You just have not been asked to prove it yet.